Welcome to DCF Investigations. Imagine a stretch of land so desolate, so thick with humidity and shadows, that it feels as though the earth itself is conspiring to keep secrets. This is not a horror movie set, nor is it a fictional landscape drawn from the darkest corners of a novelist's imagination. This is a very real, very terrifying corridor of Interstate 45 in League City, Texas. To the locals, it is a patch of overgrown scrub and bayou, a place where the oil industry meets the untamed wilderness. But to the rest of the world, and to the grieving families who have walked its muddy soil for decades, it is known by a far more sinister name: the Texas Killing Fields. For over 50 years, this region has served as a dumping ground for the bodies of young women and girls. More than 30 victims have been recovered from this corridor connecting Houston and Galveston, their lives extinguished and their remains discarded like refuse in the desolate marshes. It is a place where the water table is so high that digging a grave is nearly impossible. Yet killers have found ways to hide their crimes beneath the brush and the palmetto leaves. Tonight, we are going to walk through the timeline, the terror, and the twisted geography of a place that seems to attract the most violent predators in American history. We will examine the victims who had their futures stolen, the families who fought against a system that often ignored them, and the monsters who roamed this highway hunting for prey. To truly understand the horror of the Texas killing fields, you must first understand the atmosphere of the location itself. League City sits in the Gulf Coast region, an area defined by its oppressive heat and heavy, wet air. In the 1970s and 1980s, before urban sprawl turned much of the area into suburbs and strip malls, this was isolated territory. The landscape is flat, dominated by tall grasses, scrub oaks, and muddy bayous that snake through the terrain. It is the kind of place where a scream can be swallowed by the vastness of the empty fields, where fog rolls in off the water and obscures everything within minutes. Interstate 45 cuts through this darkness like a vein, a massive artery of concrete carrying millions of travelers, truckers, and drifters between the metropolis of Houston and the island city of Galveston. It is a road of transience, a place where people pass through but rarely stop, making it the perfect hunting ground for a predator who wishes to remain anonymous. The nightmare began in the early 1970s, a time when the cultural landscape of America was shifting. The stranger danger panic of later decades had not yet fully taken hold. Hitchhiking was a common mode of transport for teenagers, a symbol of independence and the free-spirited nature of the era. Young women felt safe walking to convenience stores or waiting at bus stops. It was in this environment of relative innocence that the killings began, shattering the community's sense of security forever. One of the earliest cases that signaled the beginning of this dark era was the disappearance of 13-year-old Colette Wilson in 1971. It was June, the heavy heat of a Texas summer already settling in. Colette was waiting for a bus after band practice, also routine activity for a girl her age. She never boarded that bus. Her father, a man who would spend the rest of his life haunted by that day, waited for her at the drop-off point. But the bus doors opened and closed, and his daughter did not step out. For months, the community rallied, searching the fields and the roadsides, holding onto a sliver of hope. That hope was extinguished when her remains were found near the festering sludge of a reservoir. She had been shot in the head. The brutality of the crime shocked the local residents, but they had no idea that this was just the beginning of a pattern that would span decades. Just a few weeks after Colette disappeared, another teenager, 14-year-old Brenda Jones, vanished while walking to visit her aunt. Her body was found the very next day in Galveston Bay. The proximity in time and the similarities in the victims' profiles sent a ripple of fear through the region. Police were baffled. Forensic science in 1971 was rudimentary at best. There was no DNA profiling, no computerized databases of offenders, and communication between different police jurisdictions was often non-existent. A killer could strike in League City, dump a body in Galveston, and live in Houston, and the disparate police departments might never connect the dots. As the years rolled on, the body count rose. But it was in the mid-1980s that the specific location off Calder Road became the epicenter of the investigation. This 25-acre patch of land, an abandoned oil field overgrown with vegetation, would yield 4 bodies, earning it the grim distinction of being the heart of the killing fields. The area was accessible only by a dirt road, a place where locals might go to dump trash or teenagers might go to drink beer, hidden from the prying eyes of the highway. The first of the Calder Road victims found was 23-year-old I-45 in 1984. Heidi was a bartender, a young woman with a vibrant spirit who vanished after leaving her father's house to use a payphone. Her remains were discovered by a dog, scattered in the brush of the oil field. The police investigation was sluggish. At the time, there was a pervasive and damaging attitude within law enforcement regarding missing young women. They were frequently dismissed as runaways, rebellious teens, or women who had simply chosen to leave their lives behind. This bias would prove to be a fatal flaw in the early years of the Killing Fields investigation, allowing predators to operate with near impunity while police waited for the victims to come home. This institutional apathy collided violently with the determination of a father named Tim Miller. In September 1984, Tim's 16-year-old daughter, Laura Miller, asked to use the phone at a convenience store to call her boyfriend. She, like I-45, vanished into thin air. When Tim Miller went to the police, begging them to look for his daughter, he was met with the standard runaway narrative. They told him she would be back in a few days. Tim knew his daughter. He knew she hadn't run away. He knew something terrible had happened. Frustrated by the lack of police action, Tim Miller began searching on his own. He walked the fields, he waded through the bayous, he plastered the city with flyers. It was a lonely, agonizing crusade. In 1986, 2 years after Laura disappeared, boys riding dirt bikes in the Calder Road field smelled a foul odor. They found a body. When police arrived and began to scour the area, they made a horrific discovery. It wasn't just one body. A second set of remains was found nearby. One of the bodies was identified as Laura Miller. The other was a Jane Doe, a woman who would remain unidentified for decades. Tim Miller's worst fears were confirmed, but his grief was compounded by a furious realization. The police had dismissed him, and all the while, his daughter's body had been decomposing just a mile from where she was last seen, lying in the same field where I-45 had been found. And they weren't alone. As investigators expanded their search of the Calder Road patch, they found a 4th body. 4 women, undiscarded in the same small plot of land. It was undeniably the work of a serial predator, or perhaps multiple predators using the same convenient dumping ground. The discovery of the Calder Road 4, I-45, Laura Miller, and the 2 Jane Does changed everything. It forced law enforcement to admit they were dealing with a monster. But admitting it and catching the killer were 2 very different things. The conditions of the bodies were a major hurdle. The Texas heat, the humidity, the scavengers, and the water had destroyed much of the physical evidence. There were no fingerprints. In the mid-'80s, DNA technology was in its infancy and not widely used. The killer had chosen a location that naturally sanitized the crime scene. Let's delve into the investigation of the unidentified victims. No, because their stories are crucial to understanding the breadth of this tragedy. For decades, the 2 Jane Does found alongside Laura Miller were known only by their sketches. They were nameless ghosts. It wasn't until 2019, more than 30 years later, that advanced DNA genealogy finally gave them their names back. The first Jane Doe was identified as Donna Prudhomme, a mother of 2 who had disappeared in 1991. Wait, you might ask, if she disappeared in 1991, how was she found in the 1986 search? She wasn't. This is where the timeline becomes even more chilling. Donna Prudhomme's body was found in the same field. But years later, proving that the killer, or killers, returned to the same spot over and over again, treating it as a personal graveyard, even after police had searched it. The other Jane Doe, found in the 1986 search, was identified as Audrey Lee Cook, a young mechanic who had vanished in 1985. The restoration of their names was a triumph of modern science, but it also highlighted the long, painful gap in justice. As we analyze the suspects, the complexity of the Texas killing fields becomes apparent. This is not a simple case of 1 killer and 30 victims. The prevailing theory among experts is that the I-45 corridor has been the hunting ground for multiple serial killers operating independently over the decades. The highway offers anonymity. The fields offer concealment. It is a perfect storm of opportunity. One of the most notorious suspects is Edward Harold Bell. Bell was a sex offender who had been living in the area during the 1970s. In the 1990s, while serving time for the murder of a Marine, Bell sent a series of chilling letters to prosecutors. In these letters, he confessed to murdering 11 girls. He referred to them as the 11 who went to heaven. He provided details that were disturbingly specific, describing how he had abducted them and the locations where he had left them. He even claimed to have killed Colette Wilson and Brenda Jones, the early victims from 1971. Bell described a mirror in his vehicle that victims would look into before they died, a detail that haunts the imagination. However, despite his confessions, Bell was never charged with the Killingfields murders. He denied the confessions later, claiming he was just trying to get better prison conditions or attention. Evidence was circumstantial, and by the time his confessions were investigated, too much time had passed, and physical evidence had degraded. Bell died in prison in 2019, taking his secrets to the grave, leaving families with half answers and lingering doubts. Then there is the case of William Reece. If Bell represents the elusive, unverified monster, Reece represents the concrete face of evil. Reece was a bulldozer operator, a man who knew the terrain of the construction sites and fields intimately. In 1997, he was convicted of kidnapping a woman named Sandra Sapah. Sandra's story is one of incredible bravery. She was abducted by Reece at a truck stop, forced into his truck, but she managed to jump out of the moving vehicle on the highway to escape. Her testimony put Reece behind bars, but for a long time, he was only connected to that one kidnapping. It wasn't until 2016 that the dominoes began to fall. Reece, of facing health issues and perhaps looking to negotiate, began to talk. He led investigators to a pasture near Houston where they found the remains of Kelly Cox, a student who had vanished in 1997. He then directed them to another field where they found Jessica Kane, another 1997 victim. Reece also confessed to the murder of Tiffany Johnston in Oklahoma. His admissions cleared up several cold cases, proving that he was indeed a serial killer operating in the exact time frame and geography of the killing fields phenomena. However, Reece has not been definitively linked to the Calder Road 4. This suggests that while Reece was undoubtedly a predator in the area, he was likely sharing the hunting ground with others. And we must also consider the possibility of a highway network. The FBI has long maintained an initiative looking into highway serial killings, noting that long-haul truckers have the mobility and the privacy to commit crimes across state lines. The killing fields sit right on a major interstate. Suspects like Mark Roland Stallings, a convicted killer who confessed to killing a girl and dumping her in the fields, fit this profile of transient violence. Stallings claimed to have intimate knowledge of the Calder Road site, details that only the killer or police would know. Yet securing a conviction has proven difficult due to his credibility and lack of corroborating physical evidence. The theories surrounding the killing fields are as murky as the bayous themselves. Some believe there is a mastermind local to the area. Warkin, someone who grew up in the bayous and knows every hidden path, someone who watched the police searches and laughed. Others believe it is purely a crime of opportunity, a location that became known in the criminal underworld as a safe place to dump a body. If you kill someone in Houston, you drive south. If you kill someone in Galveston, you drive north. You stop in the middle, in the dark, in the scrub, and you leave your burden there. It is a terrifying thought. A communal graveyard for unrelated killers. The legacy of this case is defined not just by the dead, but by the living. We cannot speak of the Texas killing fields without returning to Tim Miller. After the death of his daughter Laura, Tim did not retreat into his grief. Instead, he channeled his rage and sorrow into an organization that has changed the face of missing persons investigations in America. Texas EquuSearch. Founded in 2000, Texas EquuSearch is a volunteer search and recovery team that has worked on thousands of cases around the world. They have found hundreds of bodies and, miraculously, hundreds of living people. Tim Miller turned the worst moment of his life into a lifeline for others. Every time Texas EquuSearch deploys their drones, their horses, or their sonar boats, it is a direct legacy of Laura Miller and the failures of the investigation in the 1980s. Tim Miller forced the system to change. He forced law enforcement to take missing persons reports seriously. But what is the status of the killing fields today? The physical landscape is changing. The once isolated oil fields are being developed. Subdivisions and commercial properties are encroaching on the land that holds so many secrets. This development is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it paves over the trauma, hiding the scars of the past. On the other hand, every time a bulldozer digs into the earth to lay a foundation, there is a possibility that another bone, another clue, another victim will be unearthed. Modern forensics continues to chip away at the wall of silence. The identification of Donna Prudhomme and Audrey Cook in 2019 proved that cold cases are never truly dead. Organizations like Othram Incorporated, a private lab specializing in forensic genealogy, are working tirelessly on the remaining unidentified remains. They are rebuilding DNA profiles from degraded bone fragments, searching for distant cousins in genealogy databases, and reconstructing family trees to give names to the Jane Does. It is a slow, painstaking process, but it is the best hope for justice. Despite these advancements, many cases remain unsolved. The murders of the Calder Road 4 specifically lack a definitive conclusion regarding the perpetrator. Was it Bell? Was it Reece? Was it a suspect we haven't even named yet? The uncertainty hangs over League City like a shroud. The families of the victims are aging. Parents are dying without knowing who killed their daughters. Siblings are growing up with a void in their lives, a shadow cast by the sister they never got to know. The community reaction has evolved from terror to a grim acceptance, and now to a determination to remember. There are memorials. There are vigils. And there is a constant pressure on the district attorney's office to keep these files open. The Texas killing fields have been the subject of movies and documentaries, bringing global attention to this localized horror. But for the people of League City, it isn't entertainment. It is their history. It is the reason they lock their doors at night. It is the reason they tell their children never to walk alone near the highway. As we look at the totality of the evidence, the failures of the past are glaring. The jurisdictional squabbles between League City Police, Galveston County Sheriff's Office, and Houston Police allowed killers to slip through the cracks. Evidence was lost, literally misplaced in storage lockers or destroyed by floods. Interviews weren't recorded. Leads weren't followed. It is a textbook example of how not to manage a serial homicide investigation. However, it also serves as a lesson. Today, communication is better. Databases are linked. The runaway bias, while not entirely gone, is significantly reduced. Police are trained to treat a missing child as a potential abduction from the very first hour. We must also consider the psychology of the killers who chose this spot. Why here? Why this specific stretch of dirt? Profilers suggest that the killer felt a sense of ownership over the land. To return to the same field, to dump bodies within yards of each other, implies a comfort zone. It implies that the killer stood in that field, perhaps at night, surrounded by the deafening sound of crickets and the hum of the highway, and felt powerful. They felt safe. They believed the land would protect them. And for a long time, it did. The tragedy of the Texas killing fields is a sprawling, multi-generational saga of violence and loss. It is a story of innocent lives cut short. Girls waiting for buses, women using payphones, students driving home. It is a story of a father who refused to give up. It is a story of science catching up to brutality. But mostly, it is a story that is not yet finished. There are still killers out there who walked free. There are still bodies in the ground that have not been found. There are still names that need to be spoken. As you drive down Interstate 45 today, the scenery rushes by at 70 miles per hour. You might see the new developments, the bright lights of gas stations, the billboards. But if you look past the concrete, into the dark line of trees that borders the bayou, Remember what lies beneath. Remember Colette. Remember Brenda. Remember Heidi and Laura. Remember the women whose names we are just learning and the ones we still don't know. The fields are silent now, but the earth remembers. This case forces us to confront the reality that evil does not always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a neighbor, a truck driver, or a construction worker. It reminds us that justice is not guaranteed, but it is something that must be fought for, day after agonizing day. This has been a deep dive into the Texas killing fields by DCF Investigations. We have walked the timeline, examined the evidence, and honored the victims. But the story doesn't end here. The investigation is active. New tips are called in. DNA is being retested. The final chapter has not been written. We want to hear from you. Do you believe the killing fields were the work of a single mastermind who got away with it? Or do you accept the theory that the I-45 corridor is simply a convenient dumping ground for multiple, unrelated predators? And does the distinction even matter to the families left behind? Leave your thoughts, your theories, and your questions in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you for watching DCF Investigations. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and never stop asking questions.